Welcome to Octavia Tried to Tell Us Parable for today's pandemic, episode 13.
Episode 13.
Lucky 13, though.
It is 13. On March 13th.
Because, yes, on March 13th, and just overall, a more positive and hopeful time, certainly, than when we started this series.
We did not think we'd still be in a pandemic a year in.
No.
I don't know that we'll be out, but we have a lot more hope than we did 3, 4, 5 months ago.
Absolutely. It was just, a lot of reminiscences are going up to, like, what was your last outing? This is about the time last year that a lot of us realized, oh, this is real. This is serious, right after Tom Hanks disclosed. And we started running out of toilet paper and
water. Toilet paper.
All of a sudden, we were in a whole new world and realized, oh, this is what Octavia was trying to warn us about. She sure did try to tell us.
And we see you here in the chat telling us where you're coming from. I love it. I know we're going to give just a moment for people to keep coming in the room.
Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We know there are a lot of other places you can be on a Saturday, and you are partially zoomed out, let's face it, but we're glad you've chosen to spend this time with us for fellowship, community, and healing. It's one of the advantages of this era is that we have virtual gatherings now instead of in person, which means we can gather from all over the country. Baltimore, let me say it right.
Baltimore.
In the house. Minneapolis in the house,
all over the
Maryland,
world.
Detroit, Philly, I see you, North Carolina, New Jersey, and London, UK. Welcome.
UK.
Welcome to the UK. And yes, Yonkers, so many familiar locations, some familiar names.
Marlene Barr, I quote your stuff so much.
Maureen Barr, hello. She wrote an article about me once. So
So we're fangirling out here. Don't mind us. We're really glad you're here, and we want to be faithful to our time. So we are excited today because we're going to have another great guest talking with us about so many things that we can learn to help us not only think about and understand Octavia in another way, but giving us a parable for this pandemic. We're still in it, and we still need all the tools and all the healing we can get to live through it and, really heal our souls as well as our bodies.
Absolutely. That's really what this is all about, and so well put. And speaking of souls, today's topic is about spirituality and religion that's coming from a different direction that we as Westerners are not as familiar with, and I include myself despite my research. So I am very, very excited that today we get to investigate the Oya in Lauren Oya Olamina's name.
Yes. So we are happy. We're going to tell you about our time together. We're just going to do some introductions. We're going to have our conversation. We've got some wonderful questions from you all ahead of time. And, we also stay in the chat. Tananarive loves herself to chat. And so we'll try and catch some questions there as well. And we're looking forward to this time together. So if you're on social media, please use the hashtag #OctaviaTried. There's usually a wonderful parallel conversation on Twitter. We follow it after the meeting and we come in and pipe in. But you can use the hashtag #OctaviaTried. I am delighted to tell you about my friend and colleague, Tananarive Due. Tananarive is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She is an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. And her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She is married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays. They live with their son, Jason, and 2 cats.
I am equally delighted to introduce my longtime co-host and friend, Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the church of my grandmother, and an initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles, including in book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion and mental health, sexual and domestic violence, and navigating change. She lives in a lively intergenerational household where she is an avid vegan cook and a cyclist.
And it's my joy to introduce Dr. Funlayo E. Menzies, affectionately known as your favorite scholar priestess. She is a scholar practitioner of Africana religions, specializing in the Ifa Orisha tradition as practiced in Nigeria and among African Americans in the U.S. She brings love and light to the community through her Ifa Orisha temple, Ile Ashe Ire, which hosts weekly worship, regular classes, and social activities designed to help people of African descent learn, grow, and connect with spirit. In addition, she is a founding director of the African and Diasporic Religious Studies Association, a scholarly association dedicated to the study of Africana religions, and the founding dean of Ashe Ire Communiversity, an independent Africana Studies institute. Dr. Menzies received her PhD from Harvard University, and her work has been published in academic and popular venues, including the Journal of Africana Studies, the Review of Religious Research, and Medium. Her book in process, OB, Death, Divination, and the Divine Feminine, will produce the first scholarly monograph on the kola nut in the context of African religion. A dedicated public scholar, she lectures frequently and has appeared in documentaries for PBS and the National Geographic Channel. Again, we remind you to use the hashtag Octavia Tried. And now we are just delighted to begin our conversation. Aburo aboye iya.
Obo ato asore wori wo phone. I am so delighted to be here with the two of you. Thank you for having me.
I'm already hypnotized by your arrival.
Rattle has that effect on him. You know, that's one of my little secrets, right? It's so good to be here. Really, I admire both of you so much. And this series has been so inspirational. And as I've shared with you, I'm a huge fan of Mother Octavia E. We give reverence to her in the ancestral realm. And so this is just such a treat. It's a delight to be here with you today.
But one of the first things I want to ask you is about your Octavia story. When we invite people, we invite usually for all types of reasons about the perspectives they bring on the topic, sometimes knowing, sometimes not knowing about your love for Octavia. So please tell us your Octavia Butler story.
And also, how did you come to her? How did you come to her work? Is it okay if we start there and then go?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's
the story. Yeah,
spirit is aligned because I was going to start there. How I came to her was really serendipitous. I was looking through a friend's bookshelf, and as I do, I love books, and I always look through bookshelves. If I come to your house, I'm gonna be all in your bookshelf. And so I saw the book Adulthood Rights. That was actually the first book that I read of Octavia Butler's, and it was the image on the cover that drew me in. And the image on the cover of this particular edition of the book was one of the main characters in a state of metamorphosis when he's transitioning from looking fully human to looking like the half alien that he is. And so sci-fi honestly wasn't something that really drew me. I'm not really a sci-fi or horror type of person, But there was something in that image of metamorphosis that said, and the title, Adulthood Rights, I was kind of going through a transition. I was probably about 20 years old. So this was about 20 some years ago. And I read it and then came to find that it was the second book in the Xenogenesis series. So then I went back and read Dawn, and then read Adulthood Rights again, and then Imago. And that was my first introduction, and I was hooked. And that same friend had the Pattern Master, so I read that. And so the Patternist series and the Xenogenesis series was my first introduction to her. And after that, I was just hooked. I've read every book of hers. I've read most of them multiple times. And just before, I believe it was in about 2005, just before she sadly passed in 2006, when Fledgling came out. And so A Beautiful Connection. And I'm not sure if you've mentioned this, but there was talk of Mother Octavia doing a third parable book. And she ended up writing Fledgling instead. And so when Fledgling came out, I've already repented for this, but I was a broke undergrad, and I found out that she was going to be speaking at the City University of New York. And so I was like, oh God, I have to go. And I didn't have anything but my Metro card. I didn't have any money. I was like, but I got to get this book. I've got to get her autograph. How am I going to do it? And so I got there, and you know how they used to have the credit card machines that would just, take an imprint of your card, but wouldn't actually run it at the time. I actually used a bad card to get Fledgling. I've repented. I've repented, but I just had to get the book. And so I got the book, and I got up to the front to meet her, and I actually got to meet her, get the book autographed. And I was so fulfilled in that moment, just getting to hear her talk about the Xenogenesis series, getting to meet her. It was absolutely fabulous. And so when I found out the next year that she passed, I was actually doing an internship in Salzburg, Austria. And I was crushed, but I felt so good that I had gotten to share space with her. And I said, that's why I had to do that little naughty thing and repent about it, because I needed that moment to connect with her. And I actually just moved recently and refound my copy of Fledgling with her autograph just before I got this invitation. So it really is such a beautiful full circle moment.
I have to say, I love stories of how we beg, borrow, and steal to get books. Right?
Yes.
Right.
You are forgiven.
I had to.
It was for a good cause.
Yeah. And it was so, but I mean, I hope that underscores how important it was to me, because there was no way. I mean, I had to do everything that I could, and just getting to stand in her presence for that moment and have her look at me and say my name and sign my book and just spend that moment. There's nothing like that. We as we know right now, in the midst of the pandemic, we're being separated physically, and nothing replaces that human touch, that time of being together. So I really, look forward to us being able to do much more of that again. And I do give thanks for these digital spaces where we're able to do it now, and to not feel so isolated from one another. And, honestly, that's one thing, too, for me that really drew me in, and especially with the Xenogenesis series, and is very African, kind of going into our conversation, is that for Mother Octavia, there was always the building of community. There was always the building of family. There was always needing each other. Every story of hers has this underlying piece that even when the world is falling apart in the parables, what does Lauren do? She builds community. She moves and she says, okay, we got to keep life going. As long as there's a few of us to rebuild another community, as long as we can rebuild space together, we still have a chance to make it. And that is the ultimate African ethos, that there's always hope, that there's always tomorrow, that there's always a solution. Ifa, the Ifa tradition in particular, and all of our African traditions, we have divination, we have ritual, we have different ways of dealing with the realities of life. And so I think that, Mother Octavia was clearly very, very much influenced by all of that. And of course, having characters with Yoruba names in many of her works, like Lauren Oya, like Akin in the Xenogenesis series. So she was clearly very, very much tapped into these ideas. And that was something that drew me to her and something that also drew me to African spirituality.
I would love, since we're moving right in this direction, for you to share with us about, the Ifa Orisha traditions, just really briefly, so we are all working in the same world, and how Oya, who Oya is in relationship to Ifa Orisha traditions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Ifa Orisha tradition, which is known by many different names, but that's the name I typically use to reference it, is a spiritual tradition and a cultural tradition that comes out of the Yoruba people who are in what is now southwestern Nigeria. It's one thing that I always start with is that African religion, right? When we speak of it, we can speak of it both in the plural and in the singular. In the plural, because there are more than 2,000 ethnic groups on the African continent, and each one has its own spiritual system and way of seeing the divine. And so that's the plural, that's the multiplicity. But the singular is the fact that in each and every one of these traditions, there is an underlying ethos and there are underlying ideologies that permeate each one. And so Ifa Orisha is one tradition. It is probably the best known African tradition, partially because of the fact that a great number of Yoruba people were brought into the diaspora during the transatlantic slave trade, and that they were brought very late in the trade in particular. And so the Yoruba spirituality, Ifa Orisha system, it remained very much intact as compared to some other African systems that also made their way into the diaspora. And so what is Ifa is the cultural and spiritual and historical knowledge of the Yoruba people, which is then accessed through a divination system, which is also referenced as Ifa. Orisha are divine beings who are manifestations of the Almighty God, who in Yoruba is called Olodumare. And so it is said that there are 400 plus one of these manifestations of the divine. And that plus one indicates the ad infinitum possibility of there always being more. So any one of us can become an Orisha. And all Orisha were actually human beings who were exalted for their great deeds when they were on earth. Some of them, as human beings, were instantiations of certain primordial beings, but not all of them were. But the important part with Orisha is to know that they were all human. And so that helps us to see the divinity and the greatness in us, that the things that they have done, we can do. And so, Oya, Yansa, Epa, Oya.
Epa, Oya.
Epa, she is one of those 400 plus one manifestations of the divine. She is a fierce feminine divinity who is known as a powerful warrior, who is known for her connection with both the wind and water. She is the patron of the Niger River, which in Yoruba is known as Odo Oya. And she is also associated with the wind and therefore with the breath in the body. So every Orisha is associated with a different part of our body, and she is associated with the lungs and with the breath. So this idea of change, the idea of the wind, this is one of the reasons why she is also, along with some other divinities, associated with pandemic and with disease and with pestilence, because these things spread by way of the wind. And they also bring immense change, which she is also very much associated with. The wind can be a gentle breeze, or it can be a tornado that tears your house down. Right. And so Oya is like that. She can come and she can cool. She can be the change, when we're hot and that cool breeze comes, that's a welcome change. And she can be a change also that's not so welcome. And so she is a manifestation really of the proverb in Yoruba that says, Tibi tire ladai leaye, that it's loss and gain that make the world. In the same way that in the parable series, Mother Octavia and Lauren came with this, that change is the only constant, change is God. That is literally what Oya represents, that aspect of God that is change, that place that says, look, no matter what we think is going to happen, it may not happen that way. We can get right up to the finish line. And so one of the main ways that this is manifest through Oya, she is known as Iyansan, which means the mother of 9. And one of the most powerful and famous stories of Oya is that she actually gave birth to 9 stillborn children before she then went on to give birth to 9 live children. And part of that is the idea, and this idea that as people, we can build something. We can plan for something. The same way the mother grows a child in her womb for 9 months. You're planning for it. You're making the nursery. You're doing all these things. And then, right, that no matter what we do, how much we plan, what we think is going, the way we think is going, that at any point in time, it cannot turn out that way. But what happens? She keeps going and she tries again and again and again and again and again, 18 times. If we go through the first 9 and the second 9, that's 18 pregnancies, right? 18 times of going through that change of body, 18 times of going through that hope, 9 times of having that hope dashed and then coming back that 10th time and still trying again. And so that is why Oya is, so important as a force in the Ifa tradition, and why, of course, it's so fitting that Lauren's middle name would be Oya, because in the midst of so much destruction, in the midst of having her family killed, in the midst of seeing her whole world turn upside down, she has hope. She says, okay, let me see what I can pull from this. Let me see what God is trying to tell me. Let me see what Spirit is trying to tell me. Let me channel and let me try again. Let me try again. That's Oya.
Ooh, you are giving me goosebumps and tears and all the responses with that. Ashe. That beautiful response. And you just put it so well. I mean, I was going to ask about that intersection, between your faith and Oya and Octavia, especially in the context of how so many more people are discovering her in the midst of these emotional storms. But you just put that so well. I don't know if there's any more you would want to add about the appeal specifically of Octavia as we're being swept up in all these winds of change.
Well, I think, absolutely. The appeal is the appeal of hope, is that she presents these scenarios and that there's always that seed of hope. It's never just doom and gloom. Even like, for example, one of my favorite, it's interesting that you mentioned, because I was drawn back to her during this time. I actually reread the whole Xenogenesis series. Well, actually, I listened to it. I got it on audiobook now, and I listened to them this time. And I listened to the Wild Seed, the Patternist series as well. And the character of Doro in those Wild Seed books, there's a character, for those who are unfamiliar, who is able basically to pass from body to body and who can essentially never be killed. And even in that story, where it seems like this character cannot be defeated, that who is going to be the one who will be able to come in, that it's a young, of course, Black woman who comes in, who's always the hero in Octavia's books, right? Who comes in, and we know that Black women have been such the heroes in so many ways in life. Comes in and keeps that hope, never says, no, this person is bigger than me, that, I can't defeat them. There's never that. She's like, okay, no, well, how do we do this? Right. And so I think that the appeal of Mother Octavia is that she presents these scenarios that are quite challenging. Scenarios where, like in the Xenogenesis series, where the whole earth has been destroyed by war. Scenarios in the Parable series where, like now, we're in a time where greed has ravaged the earth, where violence has ravaged the earth, where all these things have happened, but still, there's hope. But still, there's a way to move beyond. There's a new idea. There's a new place to look to, whether we're looking to the stars to go into outer space, or whether we're looking into ourselves to go into a deeper place within that is not so focused on the external reality that we've been trained to pay so much attention to. And so definitely it makes so much sense to me that people would be drawn, because it's reflecting reality, but at the same time transcending it and offering us a way and offering us a solution, offering us a different way of being human. Right. That was part of what drew me so much into the Xenogenesis series in particular, because the idea, first of all, let's talk about that. The idea of polygamy is in there, all of these things that we talk about. But at the end of it, what it really was is just that respect for life, that, if I hurt you, I'm also hurt. So even beings that were so powerful that they, if they had the human tendency to want to take over things, they could have. But that wasn't what they were there to do, and there was always still this seed of hope. And so it makes sense to me. And I encourage those who have not read Mother Octavia's works to please, dive in. I mean, she just, with Kindred as well. I mean, just every book has such salience, it's grounded in reality, but it helps us to transcend, and it just takes us. I mean, can you imagine how many of us have thought about being transmitted back to when our ancestors lived, and being able to help them through the trials that they went through, or things of that nature? How many of us have had these ideas like Lauren has, of a new way of thinking, a new way of being? Right, that we were too afraid to either express or explore. And so definitely Mother Octavia has so much to teach us. And I'm going to be going back to read even more back through her series.
Well, there are two things you said that I want to ask you to elaborate on in one expression. You mentioned Kindred, right? And even though Kindred actually is my least favorite book, right? I started with Pattern Master. And so I was like, let's dig right on in, right? But you talked about going back and healing the past. And that's a really big concept in Ifa Orisha traditions. And I also, I know a lot of Oya stories. And I did not know the Oya story of the 9 stillborn children and the 9 births. And it made me think about Oya's ability to teach us about grief. Right. So you talked about hope, but so many of us are experiencing such grief. Over 530,000 American lives lost, not including just people who are affected, who've been impacted, right, who have been and still are ill, who've lost community and all these other things in our human life, but are still parts of our lives. Right. And so I wonder if you might talk about a bit of how Oya and Ifa Orisha traditions help us to heal what hurts, right? Heal what we've lost. Yeah. And, and I think that's part of also why we see a little bit of it, right, in Parable. But I'd love for you to chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question and reflection. And I just first honor all of those who have been lost and affected. I send immense heart energy to all of those who are grieving. And grief is so important, in our society. We in a sense, it's very interesting. We glorify and we glamorize death and killing on a certain level, but then we sweep grief under the rug. Right? We use violence and death as entertainment, but then the idea of really grieving losses, it's like, oh, we'll just get over it. And, no, right? And so African spirituality gives us room for that. For example, among the Akan, there are grievers, right? There are people who do this, who cry, who weep, who wail, who let those emotions out for those who may not be able to do that at those times. And there are many different types of grief rituals that exist in many different parts of the continent. Amongst the Yoruba, one of the most powerful things that we have is ancestral veneration practices. And these help us to understand that even when people transcend the body, they are still with us, and that we are still able to communicate with them. We are still able to include them in our gatherings. We are still able to speak about them and love them. Oftentimes, especially when we're talking about children or deaths that are unexpected, a lot of the time, of course, if someone's elderly or things we expected, but it's almost as though we never want to say the person's name again. Right. It's like, don't bring them up, because that's going to bring up sadness. That's going to bring up these negative feelings. Amongst in African spirituality and in Yoruba spirituality, we say, no, we call those names. We call the names. We bring them forth. We remember them. We give ourselves a moment to feel the sadness, but then we also transition into celebrating what they've had here. Even in the absence of coronavirus, none of us is promised tomorrow. That is something that Ifa tells us in the Odu Ifa Due. It says that no one knows the beginning and the end of all things, right? And so none of us knows at any point in time whether we are going to make it through a day. And this is why African spirituality encourages jubilation and ayo, as it is in my name, joy and enjoying life and keeping hope even in the face of tragedy and adversity. While we, and that keeping that connection is the biggest part that I think Yoruba spirituality has to offer us, to know that we don't have to push away and forget about people who have gone on, but that we can really celebrate them and really celebrate ourselves as well. Take it as a cue to live better, to live more fully, to live well, to love one another, to do everything that we can while we are here, because nothing at all is guaranteed. There's another concept in Yoruba spirituality, when we think about the world and how it's structured, that the universe is thought of as a spherical calabash, right? With the spiritual realm on the top and the earthly realm on the bottom, and then separated into left and right halves as well. On the right half, we have constructive beings, which humans are considered constructive. We can debate whether that should be or not, right? Constructive beings, human beings, Orisha, other beings. And then on the left, who do we have? All of the destructive forces of the universe. We have death, we have sickness, we have all of those things that we snap our fingers overhead and we dismiss, but we know we can never fully destroy, because they are that balance of the universe. And so that's one of the things that African spirituality gives us, is a type of realism that says, listen, life and death are what they are, right? Death and disease are realities of the world. Life is precious. Every moment is precious because it is precarious, and because there is nothing that we will ever be able to do to make it not precarious. Life is dangerous. Not everybody makes it in alive, and nobody makes it out alive, right? So it's that idea of being realistic and really understanding how that our aim is not to deny these things, but to keep ourselves on the right side of the balance, keep ourselves on the constructive side of the balance, push those forces that are negative or destructive away from ourselves to the extent possible, but accept the reality that they share the universe with us.
So much joy. And I really feel like you're talking to me personally with that, because, having lost my mother, and I know Monica has too, and just that struggle to keep the balance between grief and homage and not pushing away. It is very Western not to look at it. And speaking of sort of our Western perspective, there's frankly a lot of ignorance about African traditional religions. I did some research, when I was writing The Living Blood and My Soul to Keep and The Good House, and those books where, in my view, was trying to pay homage, but at the same time, not a practitioner, didn't know a lot. And as an artist, I wonder a couple of things. Is it appropriate? Is it respectful to, frankly, appropriate sometimes these traditions in our work in a way we may feel as homage, but often through the lens of ignorance comes out as sort of a cartoonish and reductive view of what African traditional religion is. So I'm wondering how to address sort of that barrier that exists when people are curious and want to know more and want to pay homage, but they really have to overcome some stereotypes and misrepresentations.
Powerful question. Really powerful. And it's a struggle again, like that balance, right? That TBT. And I get asked this often in reference to things like, Beyonce's Lemonade or other popular culture things that have referenced Orisha. In my personal view, the more the better. I feel like, if we have to give each other grace, we have to understand that these traditions have been demonized, they have been denigrated, they have been talked bad about. Just everything that can be done. And so the fact that we're even still talking about them, even if it's a little inaccurate, even if it's a little exaggerated, even if that we need to still be talking about them. And that, and I think that literature, we actually at the community university are about to have a class on the African spirit of Black literature and the ways that Black literature has, even in its sometimes slight missteps, has really been such a powerful force in Black folk coming back to themselves and their ancestral spirituality. Right. And so I would just encourage you, to be graceful with yourself as an artist and to know that as long as we're approaching everything, in the spirit of love and really with a spirit of homage, with a spirit of celebrating the traditions, with a spirit of presenting at least some aspect of it in a light where it is productive and positive, then I think that is a good thing. I do, also invite artists to challenge and question themselves as well, especially I say where it becomes, I guess, a problem or an issue is where it is used in an antagonistic way. For example, where if African spirituality shows up just as a way to do harm or to express darkness or things of that nature, then we really absolutely have to question that and where those, and again, I still give grace even with that because I understand that that's what's been presented. That's what's been presented. And that's what most of us, if we've heard anything about African spirituality, it's been things like that. And so that's why I feel the work I do as a scholar and why I've been called to public scholarship in particular is so important to really be able to present those accurate portrayals, to be able to present the positivity, to be able to present the truth of what it is for the public and also for artists who want to tap in and use the traditions in their creative works. But like I said, I, for one, really appreciate it. And I want there to be more of it. And I know that many, many people, like even as I said, when I was asked about the Beyonce piece, I said, look, how many young women came to me because they heard that and said, look, I want to know more about my ancestors. I want to know more about Oshun. I want to know more. However we get there, it's like in the 80s when we were rocking, Africa medallions. Had any of us been to Africa, did we really even know what that meant? But it was the idea that, okay, this is aspirational, right? This is reminding us of something that's ancestral. It's in our DNA. And that's what's so beautiful about Mother Octavia, I think, too, is that she brought she did this in such a crafty way, right? Even making Lauren's middle name Oya, she didn't go into speaking about Orisha specifically or things like that, but just these little homages, these little pieces that if you know, right? And the thing that's
like
beautiful about reading her work now is that when I first started, I didn't know. Right. When I first started reading her work, I was 20. I hadn't made any steps into Orishas yet. They hadn't called me in the way the ancestors have been calling me since I was a kid, but I hadn't fully come into this. And so now rereading and seeing certain things, I'm like, oh, okay. Even the point that was made in one of your previous webinars when you were speaking about this idea of us shaping God. And how that is very antithetical to what we're taught in the Christian ideology, but that's very much in line with what we're taught in Orisha. There's a proverb that says there is no childbearing woman who cannot give birth to an Orisha. So anybody, any person that's born on this earth can become an Orisha. They can transcend mundane humanity and become an Orisha. And when we do initiations and when we transfer that energy between each other, we call it making heads, right? Or making Orisha, making Ocha. Every time we do it, we bring the energy up. We keep that energy in the world. We keep the traditions alive. And so I think that there's a big way that, Mother Octavia paid so much homage. And I'm really only finding out now that I'm revisiting her through this lens that I have now. And it's just so beautiful to really get to know her and her work too on all of these different registers and see how well she was able to weave these themes in.
We have so many wonderful questions, and I'm like trying to figure out which ones to ask you.
I know, right? I snuck mine in as an artist.
No, and someone else raised it too, right? So I'm gonna try one, even though I have two I'm burning with. It comes back to what you talked about in the beginning, like, I didn't think of myself as a science fiction person. And so we've got a great question about how we think about spirituality and science, or in particular, African spirituality and science. So I'd love to hear you reflect on that.
I love that question because that's actually one of the things that I write about is the connections between African spirituality and science, and understanding that African, that ritual is spiritual technology. That's how we reference it, right? That our ancestors were scientists. Understand that the rituals, come on, I get excited. I'm about to preach now. Get ready. About to preach.
We ready.
The rituals that we do, that we get from our ancestors are through what? Experimentation. That's why it works. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of years of experimentation. That is science. We're talking kosi Orisha. Without plants, there are no Orisha, right? So Orisha and spirituality is deeply tied into everything on the earth, tied into plants. The same people that we reference as priests were doctors, were the herbalists, were native doctors who understood how the body worked, right? And so science and African spirituality are absolutely tied in. And even, the whole idea of the separation between science and spirituality, even in the Western context, didn't come in until after the so-called Enlightenment, right? And so even in the Western context, there was this understanding of the connection between the two, and that ultimately both spirituality and science are seeking to do the same thing, which is understand and explain reality. One is doing it primarily through physical means. I'm measuring things, that's the science. On the spiritual side, it's recognizing that, okay, after I've measured everything, there's still that, 7 ounces, like the movie, that's unaccounted for. So what is that, right? And that's where religion comes in and says, okay, we've measured all these things scientifically, but what are the parts that we aren't able to measure like that? And how do we then explain those parts? And so they're very, very intimately tied. One thing that I always speak about is that when we talk about African spirituality, I always talk about African science, because even what we think of as spiritual has scientific basis in many cases. So one classic idea is divination, right? When we do divination practices, which is seeking information from on high, however we do it, part of what we're doing is therapy, right? That's a part of what it is. A part of it is the speaking out of problems. A part of it is the finding of solutions in a time when you may feel hopeless. That is why people went to the diviner, right? The same reason why people now go and see therapists. So all of that was built in. It wasn't just about woo, woo, woo. It was very practical. It's on the ground. It's like, look, if I say you need to get your life together, okay, so here's how you're going to do that, right? Here's the ritual. Here's the thing that's going to help get you back on track to doing that. Here is the spark, right? Every Ifa story, actually speaking of scientific experimentation, is talking about what happened in the past. It's talking about an experiment. It says, look, so-and-so was in your same situation, and here's what they did. They offered sacrifice doing this, and this was the outcome, right? So every time we get a divination, it's science, it's experimentation. All of these things are built into our spirituality. There is no conflict between them. The last thing I'll say about that is that even as we begin, we see that what we call the Almighty, Olodumare, is considered the wellspring of energy, which we call Ashe, which is the vital energy that is in every single thing. And so one of the controversial things that I'm going to speak about in my book, and that I've had a couple of Yoruba scholars try to come at me for, but I'm sticking to it, is the idea that when we talk about the divinity Rumila, who is the keeper of the Ifa divination system, right? He has a name. He's usually called by this Yoruba name, Eleri Ipin, which means the witness, usually translated as the witness to destiny. But the way I'm translating it is as the witness, because Ping actually means division, the witness to division, right? And so when I say, okay, Ping means division, what does that mean? Well, that makes perfect sense, because why? Everything in the universe is made of the same atoms. They're just specialized and divided in different ways. And so now if we call it division, now we get right into the science that what God did, or what the witness, the thing that Orunmila witnessed, was the differentiation of this massive Ashe into the specialized pieces of Ashe that now became Tananarive, Monica, Funlayo, this rattle, the book, everything else, right? And so when we really go into, that's why language is so important. When we really go into analyzing the language and things like that, we see that our so-called spirituality is very much tied into science and very much tied into, again, experimentation and all of these things.
Ooh, that every answer is so poetic and beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Just like, wow. So for someone who is listening, obviously the people who are here are already curious,
Yes.
but they want to know more. What would you consider the baby steps towards sort of embracing some of these practices from African traditional religion? How did you start, or where would you suggest that others might start?
And can I add one question in there that we've gotten as well, is where might the place be for people who are not of African descent, but who also want to learn more?
Good caveat, yes.
Right? I'm like, Well, there are lots of places. Let's start there.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as learning more, there are tons of books. There are, you're welcome to come on over to my YouTube channel. I do a lot of public teaching. I also conduct Orisha prayer and meditation twice a week. And, one of the reasons that spirit, I see some of my students, in the room, and some of my friends and good people, Ashe. I'm sorry, I lost it. I got so excited seeing my
How do we learn all the we's?
Yes.
The Black we's and the non-Black we's.
Right. So for the non-Black we, I would say, yes, the books, the public offerings, they're available. And I think that it's very important for the non-Black we to also know that, and you have ancestors too. Right. And so the thing that I always encourage, non-Black folk who come to me wanting to know about these things to do is to go and find out about their ancestors. Find out what your ancestors did. Find out about the indigenous traditions, because every single part of Europe also had indigenous traditions, and has. Every single part of Asia, every single part of everywhere has indigenous traditions. And the mitochondrial DNA, the blood that you are connected with, is the most powerful connection. And so I think that, there's a way in which even positive stereotypes are still stereotypes. And I think there's a way in which there's this idea that African spirituality is more potent and more powerful and I've talked to some non-Black folks who have said, when I've said, well, look at what your ancestors do. And it's like, well, okay, but I really love your thing. And I really want, and it's like, understand that then becomes appropriation on a certain point, especially when sometimes the idea that we need spaces that are just for us is not respected, right? Understand that despite the fact that God is for everyone, because this is what people will sometimes say, God doesn't have a color, God is for everyone. That's true. But God, Olodumare, whatever names we call, manifested him, her, itself in very different ways for different people for a reason. The manifestations of the divine look like their people for a reason, right? When you go and you look at, you look at Buddhism, you look at Hinduism, the deities look like their people. You look at African spirituality, the deities look like their people for a reason. There is power in seeing yourself expressed through the divine. And so, that's something, actually a really great story. I was in Singapore doing a conference, and I ended up giving a talk about indigenous spirituality, which a lot of people and indigenous, a lot of the people who were there were from Southeast Asia and didn't even really know the extent to which Hinduism and Buddhism were conquering religions that took over the indigenous traditions that were there. And so we talked about a lot of that. And there was a woman from Russia there, and another person had told me she just had a baby. So as I do, I came up, I said, oh, I heard you just had a baby. Congratulations. The Yoruba say that there is no divinity like mother. So you are now a divinity on earth. And she had a very stern face. And when I finished, she said, I don't like this word divinity. I don't like it. I don't like deity, and I don't, and I said, oh, okay. So I left it alone. So she ended up coming to my talk later about indigenous traditions, and I'm talking about how every place has indigenous spirituality, and I'm talking about women and how patriarchy was some of the reason for taking over indigenous spirituality, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get to the end when people are going to make comments about their experience at the workshop. And when we get to her, I'm like, oh God, what is she going to say? And you know what she said? She said, I'm so glad I came today. I'm going to revive the goddess in Russia. We have this, and I'm going to bring her back. That was like, what? So, like, all of that to say, everybody is so empowered by whatever is closest to them. And so for us as African descended people, I recommend ancestors. In Ifa Orisha, we say that Baba eni ishesheni, Iya eni ishesheni, isheshela bokato borisha, that it is our mothers and our fathers who are our isheshe, meaning the originators and the keepers of our tradition. And that it is isheshe that we have to honor first and foremost before we honor any Orisha or any other type of divinity. So for those who are brand new, start with your ancestors. Actually, even before we get to the ancestors, those of you who are Ashe Ire regulars here, you know what I always say, you gotta ask your Ori. So Ori, O-R-I. If you don't take nothing else from today, O-R-I, Ori is your head, your own divinity that you are born with. It's not anything anybody needs to give you. It's not anything you need to be initiated to. We are born with Ori in our head, in our stomach, and in our feet, right? So Ori, meaning that we understand what makes sense logically, we know what feels right in our gut, and we have the ability to move our feet and get to or away from anything we need to get to or away from. That is the key. That's the beginning of African spirituality, to understand that the divinity is within you. the divinity is within you. It's not about an external worship. And so that's another place where Mother Octavia comes in, and thinking about the parable is this idea, again, that if we shape God, that means that we have that power. We have the power to see and present the divine in a way that empowers and helps us, because that's ultimately what spirituality is intended to do, to help us traverse the realities of life, like life, death, pandemic, violence, the conundrum of the fact that there is so much beauty, yet so much ugliness. There's so much love, yet so much hate. There's so much sweetness and lovemaking and so much killing too, right? We always have that. Tibitire, always the loss and the gain. And so we are able to traverse that by understanding that it starts here. That no matter where, if our ancestors want to bless us, if an Orisha wants to bless us, no matter what wants to happen, it has to start with ourselves. Understanding ourselves as divine, understanding ourselves as powerful. So there is a prayer that I channeled for Ori that I can share with you ladies, to share with all of those who have registered today. And, you know, that is just a very simple place, very simple ritual that I always recommend is simply taking some nice cool water. Omi tutu, cool water. Touch your head right here in the back and temples. And say, Ori mi tutu. Ori mi tutu. That means, may my head be cool. Ori mi tutu.
Ori mi tutu.
Yeah, that's it. May my head be cool, because coolness is one of our virtues in Yoruba culture and spirituality. That so much of the negativity in the world comes from our unwillingness to be cool. Right? From our impatience, from our wanting what we want right now and not being willing to just wait a second. So we cheat, we steal, we lie, we do, you know, these things because we're impatient and because we're not cool. So a cool head is the first thing. Iwapele, what we call iwapele, humble and gentle character. That is the other place to start. And so what I'm saying this because I want everybody to understand that African spirituality is not external. We get caught up in the accoutrement, in the rattles and the beads and the clothes, and I need to dress like this, and you need to keep a cool head, and you need to have humble and gentle character. Those are the things that mark a practitioner of African spirituality. Those are the keys. And then, of course, next would be the ancestors. When we talk about anything outside of ourselves, now our ancestors come. And so Oya, very much connected with the ancestors because of her connection with breath. She is connected with the lungs, with life and death, with the first breath of life and the last breath of life. The breath carries oxygen, right? Oxygenates every one of our limbs, every breath gives us life, literally, right? If we did not have that oxygen, we wouldn't live. And so this idea of the transition between life and death, the idea of ancestors, this is why in the diaspora, some say that Oya is the queen of the cemetery. Now, traditionally, we didn't really have cemeteries as such. Ancestors will be buried underneath their homes or on their own land. But it indicates this connection between Oya and life and death and the breath and moving in and out of different stages and states of life. And so the ancestors, you know, because they are connected to us by blood, they are interested in seeing us succeed. They're interested in their lineage continuing. And so I invite you all to come on and visit me at asheire.com. And we have lots of resources available for you there. I actually have an Ancestral Veneration Kit that I curated with a good sister friend of mine, Sister Sharifa. We put together materials and a prayer and things for people. And understand, you don't have to get this, right? It starts right with you. But for those who may say, look, I really don't know anything, I feel more comfortable with some guidance, you get a mini course resource. You get some materials and things to help you set up your own ancestral space. And know that, again, it starts with you. It starts with your Ori. I invite you to come and visit us at prayer and meditation every Sunday. So tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. EST, we'll have prayer and meditation. We do that every Wednesday as well. We do the midweek recharge to get us charged up for the week. We also have our XIII Cafe. So since just specifically for the pandemic, since many people have been working from home, we started a co-working space to help keep us motivated and hopeful as we're working from home. And we also newly started a movement ministry where once a week we have yoga and dance or different types of movement. And so I warmly invite you all to come there and again, to just remember that the ethos and the spirit of African spirituality is hope, even in the face of adversity. And that's the biggest thing that I feel our traditions have to offer us, that there is always a way that we can grieve and feel our feelings and respect our feelings and then say, okay, now, how do we move forward, right? How do we make a new day? How do we found an acorn, right? Like Lauren did. What is the new reality, right? And if we see that certain things aren't working, listen, the Yoruba also say something. The Yoruba also say that if an Orisha is not working for us, we cast it into the bush. People get shocked when I say that. They're like, oh my God. But no, that's because our ancestors are practical. They say, look, don't pour into an empty vessel. If you're doing something over and over and over and over and over and you're not getting a good result from it, stop doing that. Right? And do something that's going to bring you a better result. And so that is, a big, again, coming back to that science piece, it's the experimentation, right? One of the things that I'll say as well for those who are new is don't be afraid. Know that a lot of times, again, because of the negative stereotypes around African spirituality, there's a lot of focus on, well, be careful and don't do that because you're going to get them upset. Like the Orisha are just sitting there waiting to like pounce on you if you get something wrong. No, it's not like that, right? They are forces of nature. They are energies that are with us. Understand as well, this is very important to say, that a person does not have to be initiated to pay homage to Orisha. There are different levels of how we interact. And so there's a level that is called Aborisha, which is someone who makes homage and prayer to Orisha, but is not initiated. And then there's Olorisha, which is someone who has Orisha, who is initiated. And so understand that you can call on Oya every time you breathe. You can call on Oya to strengthen you. Right? Strengthen me. Yes. Come on, Mama Tananarive. I love it. Right?
I'm saying, I'm feeling it.
I know that. That's why deep breathing and meditation, right? We do a lot of that at XIII. That is connecting to Oya. That's connecting to change. When we breathe deeply, we change the levels of oxygen in our blood. We change certain levels of hormones in our blood. A lot of changes happen through controlling and paying attention to our breath. And so it is very, very, very important to know that you already have this in you, that Oya is already around you and connected with you. The power of change, the power of the unseen becoming the seen, right? That air, we don't see it, but if we don't have it, we'll know.
Immediately.
Yes, immediately. Thank you so much.
No words. Just, I'm so full right now. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom.
Ashe.
So,
You're so welcome.
So yes, again, you can find Iya Funlayo Wood at XIII.com. And Tananarive, can you share about, you said deep breath. I was like, yes, this is Tananarive's thing.
That leads us to we have an offshoot of these free webinars that is called Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change Workshop. And we actually meet the Saturday after our usual Octavia webinars. And there we have a smaller group. We get to see each other's faces on the screen, talk to each other, share with each other. We learn the 7 steps of Octavia's method of shaping change as we have interpreted them, not as she said, these are your 7 steps. Ongoing discussion of Octavia Butler's work and influence, the Shaping Change e-journal with monthly writing prompts. This is a way for you to stay connected with where your feelings are, what your hopes and dreams are. More interaction with us, a social media group that helps us build community, like we could all share the great news that Octavia had a landing on Mars, you know? And as a sign-up bonus, you get a recording of Octavia that my husband, Stephen Barnes, and I did with her in the year 2000. I did not know it would be one of our last conversations, but it was so great to hear her laugh, and you'll learn so much about her and her writing process.
Ooh, I need that. I'm about to go register right now.
So it's the Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change Workshop. You can learn more at www.octaviawebinar.com.
And we thank you all for being with us here today. This has been such a rich conversation.
Oh, it's been so wonderful. I just thank you all. Thank you all. Big ups and love to all the Ashe Ray family in the house. I see Mama Coco, Ayana, so many of my people. Baba Will, thank you so much. Just so much love to everybody. Jillian, oh my goodness. Good to see you, Dr. Johns. I'm just feeling the love. I'm so grateful. And I just want to, I can't be your favorite scholar priestess here without praying over y'all. Just all of the goodness, all of the blessing, just for every bit of work that you're doing. May you be empowered to continue this work. May you feel all of the beauty, all of the blessing that comes from it. And may you know how many people you're touching and just how much good you're doing always. Ashe.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yes, yes, yes.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yes, everybody. Take good care. And I hope to see you in the morning at prayer and meditation.
Take the message and your breath with you into the next week.
Adubwe. Odabo.